Mr. Derek the billionaire returned home without prior notice, and the scene unfolding in his living room nearly rendered him speechless. His triplets were perched atop Grace's back, their laughter echoing loudly as she crawled on the floor, mimicking a horse. The boys clutched her shoulders, their small legs encircling her sides, their faces radiating pure delight. It was an unusual spectacle, one that caused Derek to halt at the doorway as if his feet were rooted to the spot. For several moments, he found himself unable to utter a word. His gaze flickered between the boys and Grace, then back again. A heavy sensation settled in his chest, a perplexing mixture of confusion, hurt, and apprehension that he couldn't quite decipher. This was not the homecoming he had envisioned. This was not the image he had expected to encounter on a tranquil afternoon. He finally advanced into the room. "Grace," he said, his voice low and measured. "What is this?" Grace immediately ceased her movement, her hands pressing into the carpet. The boys fell silent. She slowly lifted her head, her eyes uncertain, her expression strained. "Sir," she whispered, "please allow me to explain." Derek gestured first toward the children, then toward her. His voice trembled even more. "Explain what, Grace? I step out of my house for a brief period, and I return to find my boys on your back. How do you expect me to react to such a sight?" Grace swallowed. One of the boys slipped from her back and grasped her arm. The other two remained close by. Their young faces appeared apprehensive, not due to Grace, but because of Derek's tone. "Sir," she said softly. They were sad. They were crying. I did not want you to come home to see them in such a state. Derek moved closer, his brow furrowed. "So this is your idea of comfort? You on the floor like this?" Grace inhaled deeply, her shoulders quivering slightly. "Sir, you may see this as a jest, but you are unaware of what transpired before you opened that door." Derek's frown deepened. "Then enlighten me as to what occurred." Grace glanced back at the boys. Evan clutched her sleeve. Liam pressed his face against her arm. Noah gazed at the floor. She then turned back to Derek. "Sir," she stated quietly, "your children did something today that they have not done for 3 years." A chill ran down Derek's spine. "What are you referring to? What did they do?" Grace lifted one hand from the floor, her voice steady but laced with fear. "Sir, just before you entered, they uttered something." Derek stepped nearer, his tone sharp. "Uttered what?" Grace met his gaze directly. They referred to someone as Daddy for the first time, and it was not you. The room fell into a profound silence. The triplets huddled near her, their tiny hands gently grasping her dress. Derek's heart felt heavy, heavier than it had in a considerable time. He stared at Grace, uncertain how to even draw a breath. "Who did they call Daddy?" he asked softly. Grace lowered her eyes. "Sir, they called me that." Derek felt the impact of her words more acutely than anticipated. For a moment, he was utterly silent. He slowly lowered himself onto the edge of the couch, his hands resting powerlessly on his knees. He attempted to comprehend why his sons would utter such a phrase. He struggled to fathom how the situation had escalated to this point. The silence stretched until Grace murmured, "Sir, before you assume I instructed them to say that, please hear what happened." Derek offered no response, but Grace continued. "Sir, 3 hours ago, they were not engaged in play. They were not laughing. They were weeping. All 3 of them. I discovered them on the stairs, clinging to one another." Her voice softened, and her eyes seemed to gaze into the distance for a fleeting moment. This was the precise instant when the memory began to form within her mind. Grace had arrived that morning with a firm resolve to perform her duties to the best of her ability. She entered the mansion silently, carrying a small bag and clad in her modest black uniform. She acknowledged the house with a gentle smile. Despite sensing the imposing nature of the environment, the silence was palpable, thick, and sorrowful. the kind of silence born from profound grief. She proceeded upstairs to check on the triplets. As she reached the hallway, she detected faint whimpering. It was not the sound of loud crying, but rather the weary kind, emanating from small hearts struggling to articulate their emotions. She moved closer, her steps deliberate, her breathing even. Upon reaching the stairs, she observed Evan, Liam, and Noah seated together, their arms entwined, tears streaming down their faces. They were not quarreling. They were not shouting. They were simply holding each other as if they had learned that their sole refuge lay within their mutual embrace. Grace slowly sat beside them. "Babies," she whispered tenderly. "What is wrong?" None of them responded. Noah wiped his face with his sleeve. Evan leaned against her shoulder. Liam buried his face in his blanket. Grace drew them closer and held them until their bodies relaxed and their breathing normalized. Then Evan lifted his small face towards her and uttered a single word that pierced deeply. "Daddy." Grace froze. "No, baby. Daddy is at work," she said softly. Evan shook his head. "Not him," he whispered. "You." Grace felt her heart fracture. She pulled the boys closer again, attempting to grasp their sorrow. Back in the living room, Grace concluded her account. Derek sat in silence, his face etched with the pain he had long concealed. Grace wiped a tear from her cheek. "Sir, I did not prompt them to address me in that manner. They spoke of their own volition. I was merely attempting to comfort them." Derek looked at her, then at his sons, all standing quietly beside her. He then whispered something Grace had not anticipated. "Grace, what else did they say?" Her breath quivered. "Sir, I believe you should sit down for this." And thus the chapter concluded, leaving the truth teetering on the brink. Derek gazed at Grace for an extended period, his breathing shallow, his chest tight, and his heart heavier than he had expected. The boys stood behind her, clutching her dress, their eyes shifting between their father and the only woman who had recently made their world feel warm once more. The room felt charged with tension, almost unnaturally still, as if the very walls were listening intently. "Grace," Derek said slowly, "what did they tell you?" Grace looked down at her hands for a moment. Her fingers trembled slightly, not from apprehension of him, but from the sheer weight of what she had heard that morning. When she raised her face again, her voice emerged softly. "Sir, they said something that made me comprehend the depth of their loneliness." Derek leaned forward slightly. "Tell me." Grace took a measured breath. "Sir, your sons inquired if you were returning." Derek blinked. "Returning? What do you mean returning? I depart the house each day. I come back each day." Grace gently shook her head. "No, sir. They were not asking about today. They were asking if you would ever return to them, to their hearts." Something shifted within Derek. That statement resonated with a part of him he had sealed away for years. He glanced at the boys again. Liam sought refuge behind Grace's arm. Evan pressed his face into her dress. Noah stared at the floor, his small fingers fidgeting nervously. He swallowed slowly. "Grace," he said, his voice growing softer, "explain what occurred before all of this." Grace nodded, but did not hurry. She rose to her feet, the boys holding her hands. She gently guided them to sit on the couch. They complied silently, their small legs dangling over the edge. Then she stepped closer to Derek, stopping a few feet away. "Sir," she said quietly, "I want to tell you everything, but I need you to understand their perspective first." Derek remained motionless. He simply nodded. Grace clasped her hands in front of her. "This morning, when I found them crying on the stairs, they were clinging to each other so tightly, almost as if they feared something. When I sat with them, they did not speak at first. They only cried harder. I held them close until they stopped trembling." Her eyes softened further as the memory resurfaced. After some time, Evan lifted his head and asked me a question. He said, "Grace, do daddies come back?" Derek felt his throat constrict. Grace continued gently. "I told him, yes, daddies come back. I said you love them and you always return home." But Evan shook his head. He said something that shattered me. Derek moved closer, almost involuntarily. "What did he say?" he whispered. Grace looked at him for a long moment. He said, "Daddy left when Mommy went to sleep, and Daddy never came back to us." The room fell into a profound silence. Derek felt his knees weaken, and he slowly sank onto the arm of the nearest chair. His gaze dropped to the floor. He remained motionless, his eyes fixed. The words struck him with unexpected force. Grace spoke even more softly now. "Sir, they do not mean the comings and goings of each day. They meant the part of you that is closed off, the part of you that used to smile, the part that used to hold them. That part of you departed the night their mother passed away." Derek closed his eyes momentarily. He felt the pain he had buried slowly surge within him like an unstoppable tide. He recalled nights spent alone in his study, occupying himself, convincing himself that the boys were too young to notice. He remembered mornings when he left before dawn, believing work would serve as a distraction from his grief. He recalled evenings when he walked past their room without entering, fearing they would perceive the sadness he carried. He had no idea they felt it so acutely. Grace continued speaking, not to assign blame, but to foster understanding. "Sir, they told me they believed they had done something wrong. They thought you were weary of them. They ventured that perhaps they spoke too much when they were little. Perhaps they cried too loudly as infants. Perhaps that is why Daddy does not look at them for long." Derek's eyes reopened, stinging. He looked at his sons. Evan's eyes were glistening. Liam held Noah's hand tightly. Noah appeared as though he wished to speak but lacked the means. Derek whispered, "Grace, why did they call you Daddy?" Grace stepped back slightly, granting him space to breathe. "Sir, when I held them this morning, when they were trembling, they wrapped their arms around me. They were crying so intensely that their voices shook. And in that moment, Evan said, 'You feel like Daddy used to feel.'" Derek felt his chest fill with pain he had ignored for too long. Grace wiped her cheek. "They have been waiting for someone to hold them the way you once did. They are not replacing you, sir. They are calling out for the love they miss. They called me Daddy because they miss their real one." Derek looked at the boys again. Their faces showed fear, hope, and confusion all mixed together. He took a slow breath and said softly, "Boys, come here." All three of them looked at Grace first. She gave a small nod. Then they stood up slowly, walking toward their father with unsure steps. When they reached him, they stopped. They looked at him like they were waiting for permission to move closer. Derek opened his arms. "Come," he whispered. Evan moved first. Liam followed. Noah came last. They crawled into their father's arms quietly, their small bodies pressing against him as if they were afraid he might disappear again. Derek closed his arms around them. It felt like holding life again. It felt like holding memories. It felt like holding something he almost lost. He whispered, "I am here. I have always been here. I am sorry for the parts of me that left." Grace watched from a distance, her hand pressed to her mouth. After a long silence, Noah lifted his head. "Daddy," he whispered, "are you staying this time?" Derek did not answer right away. He looked at Grace. Then he said softly, "Yes, but I think Grace needs to tell me something else before I explain the rest to you." Grace lowered her eyes. "Sir," she said quietly, "there is more you need to know about today." And that was how the truth began to unfold. The room stayed quiet after Grace spoke. the kind of quiet that made the air feel heavy. Derek was still holding his sons, their small bodies pressed against him as if they were afraid he might let go. Grace stood a few feet away, her hands joined in front of her, her eyes low, waiting for the right moment to say the rest of what she needed to say. Derek looked up slowly. "Grace," he said quietly, "you said there is more I need to know. What happened?" Grace nodded, but she did not speak yet. She looked at the triplets first, making sure they were calm. Evan leaned his head on Derek's shoulder. Liam held his father's shirt with both hands. Noah stood closest to Grace, his small fingers holding the edge of her uniform. They were listening. They understood more than anyone realized. Grace took a gentle breath. "Sir," she said softly after they cried, "after they told me what they felt, something else happened. Something that made me understand why they are hurting so deeply." Derek shifted a little, his arms still around the boys. "What happened?" he asked again, his voice lower now, almost afraid of the answer. Grace stepped closer by only one step. "Sir, they asked me a question no child should ever have to ask." Derek frowned slightly. "What question?" Grace looked at him, her eyes soft but full of sadness. "They asked me if their mother left because of them." Derek's breath caught. His arms tightened around the boys without him even thinking about it. Evan pressed his face deeper into Derek's chest. Liam's eyes filled with tears again. Noah lowered his head, his little shoulders shaking a bit. Derek whispered, "They said that." Grace nodded slowly. "Yes, sir," Evan said at first. "He asked me, 'Grace, did Mommy go to sleep because we were too much? Did she leave because we cried too much?' Liam said maybe they made too much noise when they were babies. Noah said he remembers you crying once, and he thought it was because of them." Derek closed his eyes for a moment. The pain in his chest felt like it was growing by the second. The boys had carried this thought, this fear, this guilt for so long, and he had no idea. They were too young to understand what happened the night Hannah died. Too young to understand that none of it was their fault. He looked down at them, his voice trembling slightly. "Boys," he whispered, "look at me." Evan lifted his head slowly. Liam wiped his tear with his sleeve. Noah turned his face toward Derek, his eyes confused and scared. Derek brushed their hair gently with his hand. "None of what happened to Mommy was your fault," he said softly. "Not one part of it. She loved you. She wanted you. She would never leave because of you." The boys looked relieved but still unsure. Grace stepped closer, her voice calm. "Sir, I told them the same thing. I told them Mommy loved them with her whole heart, but they needed to hear it from you. They needed to feel it here." She pointed to her own chest. Derek nodded slowly. "I did not know they felt this way," he whispered. "I did not know they carried this pain." Grace sat on the edge of the couch, leaving space between them. She did not want to crowd the moment. She just wanted to help. "Sir," she said gently, "children see everything, even the things adults try to hide. They saw you sad, they saw you quiet, they saw you distant, they made their own meaning from it." Derek looked at her, guilt heavy in his eyes. "I thought I was protecting them," he said quietly. "I thought if I kept myself busy, if I stayed away when I felt weak, they would not be affected." Grace shook her head softly. "Sir, hiding pain does not protect children. It confuses them. They feel it, even when you do not talk about it." The boys listened, their small eyes moving between their father and Grace. Evan whispered, "Daddy, you cried a lot. We saw you, we heard you." Derek felt his throat tighten again. "I cried because I missed your mother," he said gently. "Not because of you. Never because of you." Liam leaned forward, his little voice shaky. Daddy, did you stop loving us when Mommy went to heaven? Derek felt the question hit him like a punch inside his chest. He picked up Liam and placed him on his lap, holding him close. No, he whispered. I never stopped loving you. I just did not know how to show it anymore. Noah climbed closer to Derek. Why did you not hug us? He asked quietly. You used to hug us when we were small. Derek nodded slowly. I was afraid, he said honestly. I thought if I got close, I would feel the pain again. I thought staying busy would protect me. But it only pushed me away from you. Grace watched the scene quietly, her hands folded. She knew this was something the boys needed. She knew this was something Derek needed too. After a few moments, Derek looked at Grace again. You said there was more, he said softly. Please tell me everything. Grace exhaled slowly. Yes, sir. There is one more thing. Something that happened right before you came home. Derek straightened a little. What was it? Grace looked at the boys. Evan, she whispered gently. Remember what you told me before we started playing? Evan nodded slowly, his eyes low. Do you want to tell Daddy? Grace asked softly. Evan hesitated, then whispered. I told Grace that maybe you did not want us anymore. Derek's heart broke even more. Why would you think that? He whispered. Evan looked up with watery eyes. Because you do not smile at us. You walk past us. You do not sit with us. We thought you were tired of us. Liam added quietly. We thought you liked your office more. Noah pressed his face into Derek's side. We thought you forgot we are your boys. Grace felt tears gather in her eyes, but she stayed quiet, letting them speak. Derek held them close, his voice deep and full of truth. I never forgot, he whispered. I never stopped caring. I was hurting, and I did not know how to let you see me. The boys hugged him tight, their small arms around his waist. Grace wiped her eyes gently. Then Derek looked at her again. Grace, he said softly. Thank you. Grace shook her head. I only listened, sir. They have been carrying these thoughts for a long time. Derek stood slowly, the boys still clinging to him. Grace, he said quietly. What happened next? What made them start playing with you today? Grace lowered her eyes. Sir, she whispered, what happened next is the part I'm afraid to tell you. And the silence that followed held more questions than answers. The room stayed still after Grace said the words. Derek felt every part of him tighten. He held his sons close, but his eyes did not leave Grace. The boys felt the silence too. They clung to his shirt, unsure of what their father was about to hear. Grace stood with her hands joined in front of her, her eyes lowered for a moment, gathering courage. Derek finally spoke. Grace, he said quietly. Look at me. Grace raised her head slowly. Tell me what happened next, he said, his voice calm but heavy. Do not hide anything. Grace nodded, but she did not rush. She walked to the side of the couch and knelt in front of the boys so they could hear everything too. They watched her with wide, uncertain eyes. She placed her hands gently on her knees and breathed in slowly. Sir, she began softly. After they told me everything about how they felt, I wanted to help them feel safe. I wanted to make them smile again. But before I could even try, something else happened. Derek leaned forward. What happened? He asked quietly. Grace looked at the boys. Evan, she whispered. Remember what you asked me next? Evan looked nervous. He pressed his face into Derek's arm for a moment, then slowly looked at Grace again. He did not speak, so Grace continued for him. Quote, A4. Evan asked me if the house would ever feel happy again. Quote, 5. I told him we could try to make it feel warm again, even if it was only for a little while. I said, happiness can start small, like a tiny light. Then Liam asked me something too. Liam looked down, ashamed. Derek touched his shoulder. "What did you ask her?" he said gently. Liam whispered softly. "I inquired if this residence offered space for smiles." The words resonated deeply within Derek. He closed his eyes momentarily, grasping the extent of the boy's sorrow. They possessed insufficient years to comprehend bereavement, yet were old enough to perceive the chill of a loveless home. Grace elaborated. Quote Sako Thines. She glanced briefly at Derek. Quote 1. Derek offered no denial, inclining his head slowly. Grace continued. Subsequently, Noah grasped my arm and uttered something unexpected. Noah concealed his face against Derek's chest. Derek gently caressed his back. "Tell me, son," he murmured. "What did you say to her?" Noah shyly shook his head. Grace spoke softly. He asked, "Grace, can you demonstrate what happiness looks like?" A hush fell over the room once more. Derek gazed at Grace, startled by the question. The youngsters sought a profoundly simple yet significant request. They desired a depiction of joy, having forgotten its sensation. Grace sighed gently. "Sir, initially I was unsure how to proceed. I hesitated to coerce them or feign emotion. Thus, I joined them on the floor by the stairs and inquired about their past sources of joy." She turned towards the children. "Do you recall your answers?" Evan whispered. "Mother." Liam nodded. "Mother reading stories," he added quietly. Noah contributed. "Mother dancing with us." Grace met Derek's gaze again. Quote 5. Derek massaged his forehead, a twinge of pain crossing his features. Hannah's absence permeated the entire house. His attempt to shield them by avoiding her memory had inadvertently created greater distance. Grace resumed softly. "I recognized I could not supplant their mother. I would never attempt such a thing. However, I knew I could offer a moment of warmth, a glimmer of light." Derek inclined his head slowly. "What did you do?" he asked quietly. Grace offered a sad smile. "I told them we would attempt something uncomplicated. I assured them I would help them feel liberated for a moment." They appeared perplexed initially, but when I extended my hand to Noah, he did not recoil. Noah peeked from behind Derek's arm. Grace continued. Then Evan clasped my other hand. Liam then held onto my sleeve. I invited them to follow me. We proceeded to the living room as a cohesive unit, much like a family united by trust. She paused. Upon arrival, I posed a single question. I asked, "Dearest ones, what activity brings you happiness?" Derek tilted his head. What was their response? Grace smiled gently. They replied, "We wish to play, but we no longer know how." That declaration sank Derek's heart deeper than before. He now understood their attachment to her. She provided what he had forgotten to offer. Grace continued. So, I knelt on the floor. I began acting in a playful manner. I crawled like a sluggish turtle. I produced faint animalistic sounds. The boys observed me for an extended period. They were bewildered, yet intrigued. Then Noah touched my shoulder and inquired, "May I try?" The boys nodded quietly, recalling the moment. Grace smiled softly. I invited them to sit on my back if they wished. I anticipated perhaps one child would join, but all three climbed aboard simultaneously. This surprised me as well. They began with soft chuckles, not boisterous laughter, but faint sounds indicating an effort to recall the feeling of joy. Derek watched her intently. Then he asked quietly, "That was when I entered." Grace nodded. "Yes, sir. That was the precise moment you witnessed. Not the tears, nor the queries, nor the anguish, but solely the instance they finally smiled." Derek glanced at his sons again. Evan rested against him. Liam's eyes appeared weary. Noah attempted to conceal his face against Derek's arm. Grace lowered her tone. "Sir, they were not engaging in play because they had forgotten you. They were playing because they finally felt secure enough to exhale." Derek swallowed with difficulty. "Grace," he whispered, "thank you for confiding in me." Grace nodded gently. "Sir, there remains one further detail," she said quietly. "Something they requested just before you opened that door." Derek looked at her, his expression grave. "What did they request?" Grace inhaled slowly, her voice betraying a faint tremor. "They inquired if you would be displeased with them for experiencing happiness." The instant Grace uttered these words, the atmosphere in the room grew perceptibly heavier. Derek felt a slow, almost painful ascent of weight in his chest, his triplets gazing up at him with apprehensive eyes, awaiting his reaction. Grace remained silent, her hands clasped, her voice still soft from her last utterance. "They asked if you would be upset with them for being happy." That statement settled within Derek like a heavy stone. He regarded his sons closely. Evan rubbed his small hands together. Liam nibbled the edge of his sleeve. Noah pressed against Derek's leg as if seeking refuge from any impending answer. Derek whispered, "Boys, look at me." All three slowly raised their heads, their eyes anxious. "Why would you assume I would be displeased if you were happy?" he inquired gently. Evan spoke first, his voice barely audible. "Because you do not laugh with us," he stated quietly. Liam nodded. "You appear sorrowful when we smile," he whispered. Noah added softly, "We assumed perhaps our joy caused you pain." Derek closed his eyes for a moment. Those words pierced the deepest recesses of his being, a place he had avoided due to its profound pain. He reopened his eyes and drew his sons closer. "No," he whispered. "Your happiness never causes me pain. Never. My sorrow stems from missing your mother, and at times I struggle to find my own smile." The boys nestled against him. Derek held them tenderly, his hand resting on each small back. He felt the gentle rhythm of their hearts, their renewed trust palpable. Grace observed them, her presence quiet yet attentive, prepared to intervene if necessary. She noted the gradual unfolding, a process that had commenced years prior. Derek turned to her again. "Grace," he said deliberately, "I wish to comprehend everything that led to this day. Omit nothing." Grace nodded. "Yes, sir. I will inform you." She settled on the edge of the chair opposite him, her hands folded in her lap. "Sir," she began softly. "After they posed those questions, they engaged in an action that surprised me. They guided me to their room." Derek's brow furrowed slightly. "Their room?" he repeated. "Yes," Grace affirmed. "They wished to reveal something they keep concealed beneath their bed." The boys tensed perceptibly at her words. Liam clasped Derek's hand. Evan lowered his gaze. Noah moved closer to Grace. Derek perceived the immediate apprehension. "What is beneath your bed?" he inquired softly. The boys offered no immediate response. Grace interjected gently. "Sir, they keep drawings there. Drawings they conceal from you." Derek felt a tightening in his chest. "Why are they concealing drawings?" he whispered. Grace retrieved a folded piece of paper from her uniform pocket and slowly revealed it. "They entrusted one to me," she stated softly. "They expressed concern that its contents might cause you distress." She placed the folded paper into Derek's hand. "Unfold it," she prompted quietly. Derek opened the paper with deliberate slowness. His expression softened the instant he beheld its contents. It was a crayon drawing depicting three small boys holding hands, a woman with flowing hair beside them, and a tall man standing at a distance, almost at the periphery of the artwork. "We drew ourselves close to Grace, close to our mother, but far from you," Evan whispered. "We did not wish to cause you pain," Liam stated softly. "We thought you would be distressed upon seeing Mother," Noah added. We conceal all the artwork so you will not weep. Derek's hand trembled slightly as he held the drawing. Grace observed his face intently. "Sir," she said softly, "they are not endeavoring to erase you. They are trying to shield you." Derek inhaled slowly with difficulty. He gazed at his sons once more. "Bring me the remainder," he whispered. The boys hesitated. "I wish to see them," he stated gently. Liam shook his head. "We do not desire for you to be unhappy." Derek cupped their faces tenderly. "I shall be unhappy if I do not comprehend your hearts," he murmured. Grace nodded in accord. "Proceed," she encouraged softly. "Bring them." After a moment, Evan grasped Noah's hand. Liam followed. They ascended the stairs together, silent and uncertain. Derek waited, his breathing steady. Grace remained by his side, composed. "Sir," she whispered, "when you behold the rest, you will perceive something more profound." Derek looked at her. "What will I comprehend?" he inquired quietly. Grace lowered her gaze. "You will witness how much they miss you, sir, and how long they have been striving to connect with you." And that was precisely the instant the truth began to reveal itself. One drawing at a time. Derek sat on the couch, the drawing still in his hand, his heart feeling both heavy and tender simultaneously. Grace stayed silently beside him, affording him space, yet remaining close enough should he require strength. The house felt altered, not yet lighter, but filled with truth, replete with sentiments that had been suppressed for far too long. Upstairs, the triplets were collecting the drawings they kept secreted beneath their bed. A few minutes elapsed before small footsteps returned. Evan entered first, carrying a stack of folded papers. Liam followed closely behind, bearing his own pile. Noah arrived last. Both his hands were wrapped around a more substantial bundle, his small fingers struggling to keep the papers contained. Upon reaching the living room, they halted a few steps away from Derek. Unsure whether to approach closer, Derek opened his arms slightly. "Come," he said softly. They slowly walked over. Evan placed his stack onto Derek's lap. Liam set his beside it. Noah quietly climbed onto the couch and placed his bundle next to his father's hand. Derek took a deep breath. "Sit with me," he said gently. The boys climbed onto the couch, two positioned on his right side, and one on his left. They watched him intently, awaiting his reaction. Grace settled into the other chair, silent, her hands clasped as she observed their countenances. Derek picked up the initial drawing, one from Evan's collection. It depicted three small boys standing in the center of an immense room. They were holding hands. Behind them was a bed, with a likeness of their mother positioned above it. In the farthest corner, drawn exceedingly small, was a tiny stick figure that resembled him. Evan whispered, "That depicts the night we could not sleep." Liam added, "We held hands because we felt solitary." Noah stated softly, "You were downstairs that night." Derek recalled that particular night. He had been in his study, feigning engagement with papers, but in reality, he was merely occupying the darkness, attempting to suppress his tears. He had presumed the boys were asleep. He looked at them tenderly. "I regret not being present," he said quietly. The boys nodded, their eyes soft. He picked up another drawing. This one featured a large female figure in the middle. Her hair was long and radiant. Hannah. The boys had rendered her with a smile. All three boys were drawn close to her. Liam whispered, "We draw Mommy frequently." Derek's voice softened. "I am aware," he said gently, "and you ought to. She cherishes you." Evan looked at him perplexed. "Cherishes?" he repeated. "She's not here." Derek placed his hand on Evan's back. "Her physical presence is absent," he explained gently. "But her affection has not departed." Noah leaned into him slightly. Then why do you weep when you observe her likeness? He inquired quietly. Derek closed his eyes momentarily. Then he opened them and spoke calmly. Because I miss her, he stated. Not because of you. Never do to you. The boys visibly relaxed somewhat. Grace perceived the release evident in their postures. Derek selected another drawing. This one was distinct. It portrayed Grace seated on the floor, smiling. The boys were surrounding her, holding toys. Derek was depicted in the doorway, at a considerable distance. Derek slowly raised his gaze. Why am I standing so far away? He inquired gently. Evan whispered, Because that is how you observe us. Liam elaborated, You stand at the door, but you do not enter. Noah looked at Grace. She enters, he said softly. Grace lowered her eyes, hesitant to exacerbate the situation. Derek nodded slowly. You are correct, he murmured. I did that. I stood afar. I believed I should remain outside so you would not perceive my sorrow. Evan shook his head. We did not wish for you to be distant, he said quietly. We desired your presence. Derek's chest felt constricted once more. He drew them closer, his arms encircling all three. Quote 3, he whispered. Quote 4. The boys leaned into him, their small arms holding onto his shirt. Grace quietly wiped her eyes. Quote 5. After a prolonged silence, Derek surveyed the remaining drawings. Quote 6, he asked gently. The boys nodded and began unfolding their papers with him. Drawing after drawing revealed consistent themes. Likenesses of their mother, images of themselves together, representations of Grace assisting them, and depictions of Derek standing at a remove, sometimes outside the frame, sometimes at the margin of the page. At the base of Noah's pile, Derek discovered a drawing that caused him to pause. It illustrated the three boys seated on the stairs, their heads bowed, with teardrops drawn upon their faces. Above them were inscribed words in shaky lettering. Daddy, do you still see us? Derek felt the air escape his lungs. He gently folded the drawing and placed it upon his lap. He looked at his sons again, his voice nearly breaking. I see you, he whispered. I see all of you, and I regret if it ever seemed otherwise. He softly kissed each of their heads, sequentially. The boys held him tightly. Grace watched with a tender heart. She had witnessed these boys weeping. She had observed them concealing their artwork. She had perceived the apprehension in their eyes. Now she was observing them exposing their innermost sentiments to their father once more. Gradually, with care, but genuinely. After a considerable pause, Derek lifted his head and addressed Grace. Grace, he said softly, you preserved them. Grace gently shook her head. I merely listened, sir, she whispered. I simply remained close when they felt adrift. Derek rose slowly, still holding the boy's hands. You did more than that, he asserted. You reintroduced light into this household. Grace lowered her eyes, her voice soft. Sir, I simply provided them with what they required at that juncture. Derek nodded, visibly moved. And now? He said quietly. I must do the same. He turned to the boys. Come with me, he said gently. They clasped his hands and followed him. He walked towards the wall adjacent to the stairs, the location where Grace had previously affixed drawings. Then he looked at the boys. Give me your drawings, he said softly. We are no longer concealing them. The boys appeared uncertain. Derek smiled gently. This wall belongs to all of us, he stated. Our memories reside here. Evan placed his drawing into Derek's hand. Liam followed suit. Noah handed his over slowly, as if apprehensive that something might alter. Derek chose the initial drawing and affixed it to the wall. Henceforth, he murmured, we will not conceal our emotions. Grace observed as he placed additional drawings one by one, each one revealing their hearts. Upon completion, he turned to them again. "Boys," he said softly, "I love you. I need you to comprehend that." The boys embraced him, their small faces radiating peace. Grace stood behind them, smiling through quiet tears. Something new was commencing within that house. Something warm, something alive, something that had been absent for years. And Derek understood that this was merely the inception of healing, not the conclusion. Esteemed viewers, this narrative serves as a reminder that even the grandest abodes can feel desolate when affection is lacking. It illustrates that children do not weep for possessions or riches. They yearn for a father's embrace, a comforting voice, and a dwelling that exudes security. It imparts the lesson that healing does not always manifest audibly. Occasionally, it arrives through diminutive strides, gentle laughter, and brief moments of sincerity. If this narrative resonated with you, kindly inform us in the comments where you are viewing from, and also share what you have learned from this story. We eagerly anticipate hearing from each of you. Please remember to like, subscribe, and share so that a greater number of individuals can experience the sentiment conveyed by this narrative. And if you desire more emotionally resonant stories from us, please write your requests in the comment section, and you will be among the first to receive our subsequent transformative story. Before you depart, kindly respond to these 3 inquiries in the comments. 1. Do you believe Derek should continue to permit Grace to assist him in restoring his home? 2. Which portion of this narrative moved you the most profoundly? 3. Do you subscribe to the notion that children perceive everything adults attempt to conceal? We are eager to read your responses.